So this is a phenomenal article from Aeon. We will jump into this article. So it's a good article. Really, I like the article. This is about philosophy. Philosophy cannot resolve the question, how should we live? Good title. So we, and the article is about 1,000 words. They have mentioned that the article is 1,000 words. So let us see where it takes us. The question, how should we live, is one that many ask in a crisis, jolted out of normal patterns of life. But that question is not always a simple request for a straightforward answer, as if we could somehow read off the correct answer from the word. Phenomenal, phenomenal. Like the question, how should we live, is one that many ask in a crisis, jolted out of normal patterns of life. True. In some sense, we are looking at this question right now, especially because we are in a crisis and reality is hitting us hard now. So far, some sense of comfortable, mundane routine is what most of our lives were. So we all woke up, we all mindlessly went through the traffic, went to our office, went to our colleges, learned classes, or coded, did work, marketed, sold things, all of that. And then it was all very comfortable in a routine. We did not have to worry about what is life, how am I living life, and all of that. But this is now when you're in a crisis, is a time when you take a step back and then you're jolted in by the reality. It says, hey, life is not normal, something is happening. Am I doing the right things? That is what we are looking at. And question is not always simple. Absolutely, it is not a simple question. In some sense, it is a question that has been asked by people who are in the path of, what do you call it, as enlightenment or self-realization, if you may. And the author clearly says, as if we could somehow read off the correct answer from the word, which is true. You cannot find a book or an answer where you can just read the answer and then say, hey, oh, this is how we should live. There is no one right answer to this question. This sort of question can be like a pain that requires a response that soothes as much as it resolves. It is not obvious that academic philosophy can address such a question adequately. So the first line says that it can be a pain that requires soothing, and it needs that soothing, and as much as it resolves. So there is two parts to it. One is the idea gets resolved, or your question, you get an answer. But getting the answer is not the only thing you expect out of such a question, but more of comfort is also you expect out of this question. It is not obvious that academic philosophy can address such a question adequately. So the author says academic philosophy cannot address this question adequately. As the Australian philosopher Raymond Gaita had suggested, such a question emerges from deep within us all, from our humanity, and as such we share a common calling in coming to an answer. So it says it is common for us, it emerges from deep, and it is common for human beings. It is about humanity. Academia often misses the point here, ignoring the depth and responding as if problems about the meaning of life were logical puzzles to be dissolved or dismissed as not real problems or solved in a single way for all time. Right. So, how should you be living life? It could have had a completely different answer in, let's say, 2000 BC versus 300 AD versus 2000 now, or 2020 that we are in. So, based on the time, that answer is simple, and it is not like a logical puzzle that has to be solved in one way. Right? But the academia thinks that is how it has to be solved, but that is not true. True, at various times, philosophers such as Gilbert Ryle and more recently Michael Burley have called for a revision of academia's approach towards these sorts of questions for a thickened or expanded conception. But while improving our awareness of their complexity and diversity, such approaches still fail to address the depth that their human origin provides. So they're saying it is not enough if you do a singular unidirectional approach. It has to be thought about it from a much expanded thought process. Right? So they are bringing that forward. So they are saying improving our awareness of the complexity and diversity, such approaches still fail to address the depth that their human origin provides. He is hinting at something, but he is not being very clear about what this is. Such an approach still fails to address the depth that their human origin provides. Maybe he'll give some example to explain how this will make sense, because so far the last statement has not entirely made sense in itself, right? So let us go to the next paragraph. The presence of a humanness or depth of these sorts of questions comes not just from the context in which they are asked, but also from their origin, their speaker. So he's saying the speaker who is important, where it comes from is important, the depth from which it comes is also important. They are real questions for real people and shouldn't be dismissed with a logical flourish or treated like an interesting topic for a seminar. So it shouldn't be treated like a topic for a seminar, but it has real value. It is a real question for real people. That is what the author is trying to convey. I would laugh if I heard a computer ask, "How should we live?" after beating it at chess. But I would cry to hear a wife ask her husband on the death of their son, "How should we live?" So it is about the context. He says if a computer asks something, it is a very mundane question. It doesn't really matter at all, has no meaning. But if a wife asks this question to her husband after the death of their son, then it is heart wrenching. It is a deep question that should be delved in detail, where you need to find the meaning of life. You want to look at, why am I living? Is this the right reason to live? How am I going to live after this has happened? So there is so many in-depth meanings available from there. Right? What else? Although the same questions have been uttered, these questions have a different form. The mother's question contains a qualitative depth, a humanness that isn't there in the computer's question. We must acknowledge this if we want to find an answer to specific question she asked with such poignancy. The computer is a thing that cannot meaningfully ask those sorts of questions. So now the author is in some sense expanding from the previous paragraph. Right? He says the computer is a thing that cannot meaningfully ask those sorts of questions. In contrast, it is offensive to call a person a thing. Only a human can ask that sort of question within this sort of context. So he's saying asking this question is one part, but where the question originates is very vital. A human is that person who can ask this question in that sort of context, is what he's trying to say. We would hear the mother's words and say that they contain a depth that is revealing something perhaps previously hidden about herself. The computer's questions isn't even seeming to be shallow. So saying the computer's question does not even qualify to be shallow. We know it is not our language. It is not what it actually means to you. For someone who's even listening to that mother, it means something profound. It means something in depth. But if the same question is obtained from a computer, it doesn't mean that much. It doesn't even mean shallow. It means something even lesser than that, is what the author is trying to convey. It seems to have nothing of that sort to reveal about itself whatsoever, like a parrot repeating the words it has been taught without the complexity of the human context that gives them their usual meaning. So it says, it is as good as a parrot repeating the words it has been taught. It is meaningless. This isn't to say that computers won't one day be intelligent, conscious, or sentient, or that the human language is private. It is closer to Wittgensteinian remark that if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. Not because of the difference in, let's say, the lion talks in Spanish or we can understand English, but more of how the language has evolved based on our experiences, based on many millennia of our experiences, will be different for a lion versus us, is what he means. This means that the form that a language takes reflects the complex social context of the life of the speaker. So it says it reflects so much about the social context of life of the speaker, and the degree to which I share a similar form of life with the speaker is the same degree to which I can meaningfully understand the utterance. So if you're someone who is a mother, you can relate so much more to a mother losing her child. If you are someone who has never been married and has never lost somebody very close to your heart, maybe you will still understand, but you will understand lesser. You relate lesser to the mother who has lost her child, is what they are trying to convey. The life of the computer, we suppose, is either one-dimensional due to its lack in depth, or even if it has depth, it would be uncommunicable through human language, because simply put, we and they differ so much. So they're saying, though there is, let's say, a language called English, or a language called Spanish, a language called Tamil, a language called Hindi, even though if two of them, a mother and a computer, use the same language in the literal sense, doesn't mean how they communicate and what they mean will mean the exact same based on where it is coming from. See, he's in some sense, we started off with the idea of it is not just about the question or the language, about where it comes from, what is the context. Now he is continuously expanding and going in depth into that idea. He's taken one idea and gotten further and further and further in depth in that idea. So he says the humanness that provides the depth for our language is simply inaccessible to silicon chips and copper wires, and vice versa. This depth to the human condition is part of what we mean when we speak of our humanity, spirit, or soul, and anyone who wishes to question or explore this aspect of the human condition must do so in a form of language that can access and replicate its depth. So he's saying it is what we mean is a human condition, and is because of our humanity, spirit, or soul, and based on where it comes from, and not because of just because there is a language that exists. We call those sorts of languages spiritual, but this way of speaking shouldn't be taken literally. It doesn't mean the spirits, souls, and gods exist, or that we must believe in their literal existence in order to use this sort of language. So again, he is kind of hinting at something. He says, hey, don't take it literally, but maybe he'll explain it further down. The questions about meaning of life and other kinds, similar kind, are often misconstrued by those too ready to think of them as straightforward request for an objective true answer. So he says, hey, this is not objective. It is not going to be one right answer. It is going to be a plethora of things, lot of things with lot of depth. But people do misconstrue this, who are ready to think of themselves as straightforward request for objective true answer. He says he is in some sense refuting that is not that way. Consider, for example, what atheists mean by soul. What do you call atheists? Atheists are people who don't believe in God. The definition might be slightly different, but in a layman sense, an atheist is someone who does not believe in God or soul. When they refute the cognitive proposition that asserts the literal existence of souls, in comparison with what I mean when I describe slavery as soul destroying. So the author takes a sentence, slavery is soul destroying, right? He says soul destroying means it sucks the soul out of you. It crushes who you are as a person, as an individual, as a being. But some people can take it at literal sense and then say, hey, I don't even understand what, or I don't even agree that there is something called a soul that exists. So how do you even call it as crushing soul if souls don't even exist? Right? If atheists were to argue that slavery cannot be soul destroying because souls don't exist, then I would say that there is a meaning here that's lost on them by being overly literal. If the statement slavery is soul destroying is forced into a purely cognitive form, then not only does it misrepresent what I meant to say, it actively prevents me from ever saying it. This is beautiful, beautiful. The meaning is so nice in this statement where he says slavery is soul destroying means it is crushing. It destroys who you are, but it doesn't mean it destroys your soul. It does not say it take out your soul and that is being destroyed, that is being annihilated. So he says it destroys you as a person, as an individual, as a human, as a soul in as many ways as possible. So he says when in the purely cognitive form, when you represent or when you think about this statement, not only does it misrepresent what I wanted to say, but it also actively prevents me from ever saying it, because the counter argument is there is no soul, which means the statement is false, which means I cannot say that statement. I want to express something that represents the depth of the sort of experience I am having. This isn't a matter of making an implied statement about whether or not souls exist. It is not affected by the literal existence or non-existence of souls. So he says this does not really matter if souls exist or not. I am trying to express something. Don't take it literally. This sort of meaning to spiritual language is found at a different dimension to where cognitivists look, irrespective of their atheism. And this is achieved through our capacity to embed a dimension of depth to the form of our language through the non-cognitive process of expressing, describing, and evoking our sense of humanity within one another. See, he has gone roundabout way of talking about so many things. Like he started off by saying this is one experience, but it depends on where it comes from. Then he gave example of a computer versus a mother. Then he delved even deeper into what meaning can a silicon chip make, or what meaning can a lion make versus a mother making the same statement, how different a language could be. And then finally he comes down and then he says, what I mean by spiritual language, it is not about praying to Jesus or God, but is more of the humanity, the humane part of the language is what I call it as spiritual language, and not just language. Right? He has gotten so much around and then he has reached this point. Right? This is achieved through our capacity to embed a dimension of depth to the form of our language, which is the key difference between what a computer can say versus what a human can say. Through non-cognitive process of expressing, describing and evoking our sense of humanity within each other, which is a very clear contradiction to just having a cognitive process. The cognitive process will tell you soul is not there or soul is there. Slavery destroys soul, so it takes out the soul and then it destroys it. But the non-cognitive method of expressing, describing is what humanity is about. The sense of humanity is kicks in only when you have the non-cognitive processes running through language and not just by the cognitive process, not the purely cognitive form. This is the last paragraph. When considering how to answer the question, how should we live, we should first reflect on how it is being asked. Is it the cognitive question looking for a literal matter of fact answer, or is it a part and non-cognitive spiritual remark in answer to a particular human and particularly human situation? This question, so often asked by us in times of crisis and despair or love and joy, expresses and indeed defines our sense of humanity. So he's concluded by saying it clearly there is a difference if this is a pure cognitive question or a matter of fact, non-cognitive spiritual remark in answer to one specific question or a particular human in a particular situation. And when in crisis and despair or in love and joy, it indeed defines our sense of humanity. He says language can exist, I don't really care, but how humanity or the sense of humanity is differentiated through these type of questions, which cannot be purely cognitive but has to be kind of non-cognitive and spiritual language in his point of view. Right? I hope you did enjoy this article. I really did enjoy this article a lot.